Welcome to the UCM Interface Bible Study Podcast, isang Bible study podcast by Pinoys for Pinoys, hosted by UCM Interface, ang young adults community ng Union Church of Manila. Taglish conversational, expository, or inductive study method. Di kami experts, most of us are young professionals, but we do try our best to study context and let Scripture speak for itself. Sa aming book studies at special topics, yung goal namin is to provide you with materials to help you live, work, speak, and serve as a follower of Jesus Christ. Thanks for joining us. At kung trip nyo tong ginagawa namin, please subscribe and share with your friends and family. Okay, hello, we are back.
Hi, hello everyone. Ako si Rainier, Director ng Young Adult Ministry sa Union Church of Manila.
And this is Gutch, commercial voice artist. And we have a new set of guests this time around. Mga new voices.
Yeah, hi guys. My name's Megan. I'm 27 years old, in between jobs right now, but I'm about to start working in the financial technology industry.
Nice.
Very timely.
Fintech. Diyan yayaman si Megan eh.
You know. Tsaka ngayon, I think everybody's doing like online transactions.
The wave of the future.
Yeah.
Booming industry.
It's also safer.
That's true.
Yeah. Oh. Okay.
Hello. My name is Mitch Alagao. Marami akong racket, guys. Currently, I am program director for Launchpad at Abotala. But I am also a writer and editor.
Can you tell us about Abotala?
Yeah, so Abotala is a self-directed, interest-led learning center. And we have 2 programs currently. So we have one for 12 to 18-year-olds. We call it Abotala High. And we have another one for an older set, 17 to 22-year-olds. That's Launchpad. We really just want to make learning more empowering and more collaborative and really more fun for teens and tweens nowadays, especially with what's going on currently. Everyone's at home, diba? So, di sila makalabas.
That's right. Yeah, by the way, this is not exactly Mitch's first time in our podcast kasi naging guest na natin siya dati.
Yes.
Kasama yung husband niya.
Yeah, check out the episode ng How to Do Inductive Bible Study na winworkshop namin yung Romans 12:1 and 2.
That's
one
correct.
of our older episodes. Another fun fact din, si Mitch and si Joel, yung husband ni Mitch, ninong-ninang ng aking firstborn.
Yes.
So, kumare.
Pare, kamusta?
Yeah, kumare.
So, natapos na rin ang ating break at magsisimula na tayo sa ating bagong season. And sa season na to, ang tatalakayin natin ay ang Book of Ruth. It's a very short season. 4 chapters lang naman. Dito nang gagaling yung mga very sikat na statements, diba? Yung, your people shall be my people. Your God, my God, diba? Sa mga ginagamit ito, kasal minsan, diba?
Sa weddings ko naririnig yan eh.
Strangely enough.
To be fair, di ba you marry into the family? So, baka naman addressed to sa mother-in-law, di ba? Kaya, pag-group chat na eh, di ba? Start strong.
Tsaka yung itong Book of Ruth, madalas ang interpreted as a love story.
Yeah.
Love story siya.
Even on screen na, yung mga Christian movie na Ruth, parang very love.
Romantic.
May pagka-K-drama feel, mga ganyan, di ba?
That's the usual take.
Tsaka ano yan, nung panahon ko, nung mga women's conferences, laging may mga ano yan na parang, find yourself a Boaz.
Oh!
Yeah,
Diba?
no?
Yeah, it's like how to be a Ruth.
Oh,
Yes,
oh my goodness.
exactly.
Magpaka-Moabite ka. Yan, mga ganyan. Anyway, so some other interesting points about the Book of Ruth. This is one of the 2 books in the Bible that's named after a woman.
Right.
The other one is Esther, which we covered as our first season. Tapos ito, Ruth, which goes to the second interesting point, which we already mentioned, na it's the only book sa Bible na yung primary character is a non-Israelite. At hindi lang yun, it's Moabite pa.
That's correct.
We'll discuss that later kung sino yung mga Moabites. Another interesting point as well is that supposedly si Lord dito parang tahimik siya. Hindi siya active dito. Sa ibang mga stories na may sasabihin talaga siya or meron siya ipapadala. Dito wala. Walang prophet. Seemingly silent siya. Pero yung tanong is, wala nga ba talaga siya dito?
Yeah.
MIA ba talaga siya? And then, right before we start with our discussion, because this is yung ating first episode ng isang bagong series, so it's nice to have setting, authorship, tsaka purpose ng Book of Ruth. First, yung setting niya. Ang Ruth happens in the time of the judges, as with the first verse ng chapter 1. And itong time ng judges na to, it's a really, really bad period.
Super interesting that it's set during that time.
The general atmosphere.
Oo, sa akin kasi whenever I read Judges, parang Mad Max siya eh.
Yes.
Yung nga, yung sabi nga sa Judges 21:25, everyone did as he saw fit. Talagang
Yes.
lawlessness. Violence, lawlessness around them, but not just from outside forces. Even the people of Israel was so bad. Parang
Yeah,
ganong
that's
klase.
right.
I actually was just reading the Book of Judges. And you guys know that woman who was cut into 12 pieces?
Yeah,
Dismembered.
Actually, yeah, sa ating mga listeners, if you guys want to check out just how bad the time of the Judges was, maybe read yung last story ng Judges starting from chapter 19. Wild talaga siya. It's a really bad time nga, as we said, especially for the vulnerable, such as women and widows. And dito, yung widows yung naka-spotlight dito sa story na to. Next is authorship and date. Ayon sa tradition, sabi daw, baka
Yeah.
si Samuel.
Possibly.
Could be.
Baka.
Nothing definitive on this one actually kasi hindi nagsasangayon yung mga scholars
Oo.
eh. Tanong na lang natin sa Lord pag nakita na natin siya kasama ng mga dinosaur questions natin, di ba? But anyway, which also affects kung kailan siya sinulat kasi kung hindi natin alam kung sino yung author, we don't actually know when this would be. Except, there is one factor though, is that may mention about David at the end.
Yes.
So, chances are, this was probably after nag-rise si David.
Yeah.
Either as king or many, many years after that or something. Pero important na si David dito. Enough to be mentioned at the very end.
Yes.
And finally, yung purpose, ito marami to eh. Walang one exact point.
No.
So we'll just mention some of them. First is, kaya rin minention diba si Samuel yung author? Could be, is because nga yung ending nito will reveal na si Ruth, who is a Moabite, is the distant lola ni David. Spoiler, pero that's the ending. Which also means na siya yung distant relative, distant ancestor ng promised Messiah.
Yeah.
Which I think might be even connected to the idea na yung redemption is not just for the Jews, but for anyone who gives their life to God. And it's not just a New Testament idea. It's all over the Old Testament,
Yes.
especially here sa Ruth. The other one is also yung kinsman redeemer, yung concept na yon.
I love that.
Tama,
I love
diba?
that concept.
Levirate marriage.
Yeah, it's a key idea, yung kinsman redeemer. And then last is also, and I think this one is particularly relevant, yung sa gitna ng mundo na sobrang madilim, na God is still in control of human events.
God's providence, yeah.
Yun,
Yeah.
God's providence. And he could actually be working out his plan in the most unlikely, unexpected ways, using nobodies in the middle of nowhere, going through ordinary events. Diba?
That's
It's
right.
the events here is, there's nothing bombastic dito sa
Yeah.
four chapters.
Walang parting
Ito,
of
it's
the
a-
Red Sea.
Oh, di ba?
ganun.
Walang big event eh. Slice of life kumbaga eh. Medyo...
Yeah, which makes it more beautiful for me kasi it's just normal people, living everyday lives.
Yeah.
And you see the hand of God just, there. And one thing I just quickly want to bring out that I really love here is parang you see here how even in the midst of like the context of Judges where sobrang baba ng tingin sa babae, the way that the story is told is that women are given dignity.
Yeah.
Alam mo yun? Even if they're like widows, and one is a Moabite, and you know how ang tingin talaga sa kanila parang, sorry to say, parang mga aso. But here, the eye, the lens through which they're looked at, has a lot of dignity and compassion. I just find that really beautiful,
Yeah.
given their context, diba?
And we will discover more. Marami pala talagang mga angles itong kwento na to. Pero magandang sagutin yung yung will you find your Boaz?
Ayan.
Ooh, find yourself a Boaz.
Ayan. Okay. So anyway, so before we go through the first chapter of Ruth for this episode, let's go through our reading. 3, 2, 1, and... The Book of Ruth. Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Kilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law,
Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband.
Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her,
No, we will return with you to your people.
But Naomi said,
Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me.
Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said,
See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law.
But Ruth said,
Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you.
And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said,
Is this Naomi?
She said to them,
Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?
So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Okay, so medyo iba yung reading natin kasi hindi lang ako yung nagbabasa. At least for this short season, so I asked some friends to do the voices. Insert lang ako ng shoutout dito kay Joyce Burton Titular as Naomi. Si Joyce ay aking ninang sa kasal and a veteran voice artist and also one of the hosts sa 700 Club.
Joyce Titular was a former beauty queen, Miss Philippines.
Oh, wow.
Yes, oo. Tapos we also have Rosel Manahan Chelo as Ruth, friend of mine and also another veteran voice artist who I work with a lot. She also has her own podcast called Miss M on Air sa Spotify. And then we also have Rainier who does the voice for Boaz.
Bagay.
Finally, there's me for the rest of the voices. Thanks to everybody who volunteered to do Ruth, the readings for Ruth. Okay, so sa Ruth chapter 1 ang maglilid sa atin sa discussion I see Megan. O, diba?
Yay.
Hey, Megan, take it away.
Okay, in verse 1, in the passage we just read, it starts with in the days when the judges ruled. And as Gutch already mentioned earlier, the time of the judges wasn't exactly a great time to be in. So not only was the time like full of immorality, but it was also a very dangerous time. Like rape and murder were very common.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you imagine traveling during this time, it's kind of risky, right?
Yeah.
But so in this verse, we find that there's a famine in the land and a guy from Bethlehem moves to Moab. So I don't know if you guys know this small tidbit, but Bethlehem actually means house of bread.
That's
Oo
right.
nga.
So it's quite ironic how in the house of bread, there's a famine. Walang bread sa house of bread.
It must be that bad, ano, na
Yes.
wala nang bread dun sa House of Bread at pumunta ka pa dun sa land ng Moab.
Pagan.
Ganun ka-desperate na walang-wala talaga.
Right.
Yeah. And I think at that time also, famine was seen as a result of the covenantal breach.
That's correct. That was also very clear in the law of Moses, even in Deuteronomy. Pag merong breach dito sa agreement natin with Yahweh, you'll be punished at isang form ng punishment ngayong famine.
So they moved to Moab. But you guys know about the country of Moab.
Very bad history.
If I remember correctly, the Moabite people came from yung daughter ni Lot.
Lot and his daughter.
Incestuous relationship.
Oh.
So Moab was a pagan nation and they actually worshipped Chemosh. They had human sacrifices.
Yeah.
So you can imagine. I think about that and I'm like, why did you guys choose to go to Moab of all places?
Yeah, but imagine, must have been that bad.
Must be that bad.
Yes.
That you would
Yes.
want to go there.
Eh, dun may pagkain yata eh.
And then another interesting thing to note is that in the early period of the Judges, the Moabite king actually invaded Israel and enslaved them for almost 2 decades. So it's a very weird choice.
Unless you're very desperate.
Desperate,
yes, exactly. Unless you're incredibly desperate.
That bad, yeah.
In verse 2, we see the names of the people. And during those times, names were very important. It was a very strong part of your identity.
That's right, yeah.
So it's interesting to know that the name Elimelech means God is king.
Oh.
So the guy who's named God is king leaves the land of God and goes to another place.
Yeah.
To Moab.
Right. And he left the land that was given to his people.
Exactly. And then Naomi, her name means pleasant or lovely. We'll revisit that later in the passage. Malon actually has a root that means to be sick, and Chilion points to failing or annihilation.
Really?
Quite dark names to give.
Why would you name your child that?
Weird.
Yeah,
Why would you
weird,
name
no?
your-
Baka siguro masakitin sila. These boys weren't healthy. We don't know. And maybe that's one reason why they had to leave Bethlehem.
Because they were sickly?
Kailangan buhayin natin tong boys.
Oh, okay.
Kasi diba
yeah.
contextual din yung mga pangalan nila eh. Diba?
It could be na it was during a bad time that they were born, and so they were named after a certain
What's
season.
happening around
Pwede,
them.
no?
They're actually called the Ephrathites from Bethlehem. I did read that some scholars do point out that they mention Ephrathites here because their family was actually well known and influential in the community. It's like the Zobels. I think that's
okay,
how
okay.
they explain it. Okay, Gotch, could you please read 3 to 5?
But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Malon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Grabe, no?
Yeah, so in this verse, we see 3 people who die, right? The father and his 2 sons.
Yeah.
The 3 girls are left by themselves, the mom and the daughters-in-law. And it's ironic how they moved to escape the famine. And yet, what they actually experienced was death.
But
Oo.
death followed them.
Bad to worse nga, di ba?
Yeah, from bad
Right.
to worse, exactly.
But what's interesting here is the number of years 10. In the Old Testament, well, even in the New Testament, in the Bible in general, numbers represent something very significant. In fact, this story is framed or bracketed by the number 10. But we will
Ooh.
learn that later. I'll explain that when we get to chapter 4.
Oh, tsaka, itong starting point ng 10, was it when they moved or when they found wives?
It's not clear also.
Not clear, no? So at least they stayed there in Moab for 10 years. At least 10
At
years.
least, yeah.
Yeah.
So a long time.
And imagine during those times, losing not only your husband, but also your sons. It was a very patriarchal society. So when the head of the household dies, which is a man, then his sons get to keep the inheritance, right? But now even the ones who are our heirs are dead.
Oo, grabe.
And you have no protection.
Exactly. And as mentioned before, a widow in those times, they're very vulnerable people. Together with orphans and
Yes.
foreigners, right?
May famine na nga around. Dangerous pa around. Namatayan ka pa. Hindi lang ng asawa, pati mga anak.
Oo.
Wala ka na talagang protection. Talagang powerless ka.
And I mean, even now, until now, it happens in certain African countries. So I know this because I used to work with an NGO that helped protect the poor from violence. And hindi ko na lang sabihin yung details, but in one of the African countries, the issue there that they were trying to address was that when a woman's husband died, nagiging widow siya, siniseize yung kanyang property.
Hindi na nanakaw sa kanya.
Oo, and like sometimes they would find the women, nakatira sila sa parang bahay ng manok.
Oh, wow.
Doon na lang sila
Yeah,
sumisilong. Kasi kinuha, like everything. They were just cast out. And that's like now in modern times. So imagine what more during these times of the judges.
So imagine mo yung time talaga na to, no?
Okay, so could Rainier please read verses 6 and 7?
Okay, verses 6 and 7. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Oh, uuwi sila. May chibug na.
May bread na ulit sa House of Bread.
Exactly. And I just wanted to zoom in on our particular phrase in verse 6. In my translation, it says, the Lord has visited his people. I think in Rainier's, it was the aid of the Lord.
Sa NLT, it's the Lord had blessed his people.
So in the 3 different translations that we discussed, like the focus in the wording is God's action.
That's right.
His
Yeah,
initiative.
that's right.
Very nice.
Right? Like God is consciously
Yeah.
involved in it.
So may acknowledgement that this is God.
Yes.
That he's present.
So they go back to Bethlehem, right? They go back to the house of bread. And the word return comes up a lot in this account. Like if I count from verses 6 until the end of chapter 1, I counted like 8 times. Like the word return.
Oo nga,
There's
no?
always significance whenever something is repeated, diba? Either for emphasis or to highlight.
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned this before sa other episodes, pero nung time naman na to, wala naman silang parang bold or highlight
silang iba.
or
Bold
caps
font.
lock, di ba parang ganun, di ba?
Italics,
So,
wala.
whenever it's repeated, that's like, uy, makinig kayo. This thing is important. This concept is important.
Now we see that, okay, there's food in Bethlehem. So Naomi and the 2 daughters-in-law are heading back
So,
already.
uwi na.
And then Mitch, could you read verse 8?
But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me."
The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." While they're on the way back to Bethlehem, Naomi goes,
Uwi na kayo.
Yeah.
When I'm reading this, it really sounds like si Naomi was just trying to reason with them na, be practical, ladies.
Yun.
Yeah.
Oo.
Balik na kayo. Kasi wala kayong future. Pagka sumama kayo sa akin, wala kayong future. I'm a dead end. If you join me, you're dead.
Yeah.
Diba? Go
And
home.
imagine the courage it took to say that.
I guess Naomi was also thinking about yung welfare nung dalawang babae na...
she knew that their lives would be difficult.
Oo, tsaka kung umalis pa sila kay Naomi, ano ba mangyayari kay Naomi?
Yeah.
Mas mahihirapan pa siya lalo.
Yeah.
Worse
Imagine
than
being an
before.
old woman, a widow, and then they're like, "We'll go with you." Siguro kung ako yun, ay, thanks guys.
O, di ba parang...
The
at
more
least-
the merrier.
Oo.
May katamay ako.
Diba?
Pero dito, mamamatay kayo pagkasama niyo ako. Parang ganun. Wala kayong mapupuntahan.
And I think it's one of the many instances of grace in this book.
Yes.
For her to think of the welfare of her daughters-in-law, even if it would have benefited her if they stayed.
They show na grace is not just like fluffy feelings. Grace can be very practical. Na I love how very anti-telenovela. Because everyone's nice. Mabait si mother-in-law, mabait si daughter-in-law. Na parang, these are good people. Bad things have happened, and
Yeah.
like, in general, the land of Israel had done something for the famine to happen. But individually, there were still like good people, which I think is something we should also remember na, di ba, bad things happen to good people. Wala, it happens. Kasi a lot of the time, like, even now, I'm very surprised to hear people say na parang, may masamang nangyari, oh, baka may sin ka sa buhay mo. So, medyo...
Meron naman talaga.
Lahat tayo. Parang gusto ko sabihin, actually, girl, di lang ako. Tayong lahat yan.
Yung minention niyo yung parang these are good people. I'm just thinking about yung character ni Naomi. From the perspective naman ni Ruth tsaka ni Orpah. from them to actually consider going with her, there must be something about Naomi na somehow, parang worth sticking around.
Yeah.
Yung idea lang na wala na silang business there. They have all the right to leave, but they stayed somehow. Yung buhay siguro ni Naomi had some form of impact sa buhay nila.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fascinating also in verse 8 that Naomi prays to the Lord for her two pagan daughters-in-law. She says, "May the Lord deal kindly with you." It shows that Naomi recognized God's protection and provision and presence, even for people who didn't really believe in God.
So nice insight.
So when Naomi tells her daughters-in-law, "Oh, okay, leave me," what do they say?
Verse 10 says, "We will go back with you to your people." Oh, adamant sila.
Sa NLT, sabi, no, we want to go with you to your people.
And actually, the first thing that they do is they cried, right?
Nag-iyakan sila, guys.
That's
Torn
right, yeah.
between, I don't know, two difficult choices, probably. Either they stay with Naomi, which is difficult, or go and find a new husband, which is also difficult because they've had a relationship with Naomi all these years. And what does Naomi respond with? She says in verse 11, "But Naomi said, 'Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly better for me, for your sake, that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me.'"
Wow.
Can we just unpack what she said? The second half of verse 13 says, "Because the Lord's hand has turned against me." She has this perspective that God is out to get me or something like that.
That this happened to her because of judgment, probably.
Parang may ganun siyang attitude. Come to think of it, they didn't really display loyalty to God by leaving the land of Bethlehem.
That's right.
They went to a pagan land, which to me, parang, what, don't you trust your God that He will provide for you? Ikaw, Elimelech, your name means God is king, but you're not living up to that reputation or to what your name means. Plus, they allowed their boys to marry Moabites.
Napaisip siya.
Baka nga siguro kaya nag-isip na rin si Naomi na, the Lord's hand has turned against me.
Yeah. In the verses I read, you actually see a concept of levirate marriage.
Yes.
Medyo confusing siya, no? I mean, if you're not familiar with that, confusing, ano to? Ang tingin ko dito, bakit nasa kanya lang yung responsibility of producing a male child? Responsibility ko na bigyan kayo ng mapapangasawa? That's very strange.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even for people who read the Bible and then automatically apply yung current culture, it's like, what is this weird stuff? Parang ganyan, di ba?
Yeah. Women at that time, a lot of their worth was tied to their offsprings, their womb.
Yes.
That's right.
Actually, the first time I read the chapter without studying the context, I thought that Naomi was a bit insecure. Kind of came out to me as oh, I can't bear any more children, so leave me, I'll just have nothing na lang. But of course, as I studied more, I realized, she didn't just say these things out of whim.
Yeah, may basis.
Na pinaghuhugutan na actual thing, which is the levirate marriage.
Yeah. So, the levirate marriage was a practice common at that time among the Israelites. And it was a provision in the Jewish law where if a man died without a son, the man's brother marries the widow of the brother. So, for
Yes.
example, if Rainier had a wife and then Rainier passes away, Rainier's wife would marry Rainier's brother. That's the concept. The purpose of this was really to preserve property and lineage. We remember that Canaan was the inheritance after Exodus. So you just want to ensure that your descendants still have a part of that land, right?
And just to provide context, it wasn't specific to the Israelites. So a lot of other cultures actually have variations of this system. So I think in Indonesia, they have something similar. Parts of Africa, it's really very well known, I guess, to the readers at the time. Na yun sa atin, hindi na kasi ganon.
Hindi, kaya pag binasa na to ng modern reader, parang
weird, yeah.
Ano to?
It's like incest-ish, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
And so the point is, hindi lalabas yung inheritance. So the inheritance will stay within the family line, and that the dead husband's name will sort of not be obliterated from the genealogy or something like that, right?
Tsaka, I guess to also provide protection to the women na nawalan ng husbands and hindi sila iniwanan lang.
Yes,
Kasi
yes.
without the levirate law, pwedeng itsipwera na lang yung asawa mo.
Yeah.
Bahala
That's
ka na,
right.
bahala ka na sa buhay mo. Whereas here, your brother has to marry her, she'll be protected. Kasi, again, widows were very vulnerable at that time.
Right.
Now, looking at it through a modern lens, we can frown upon it. We can say many things about it. But at that time, it was actually, in a way, it is another way that grace was shown to someone who's vulnerable.
Yes, this is a well-known practice even during the time ng panahon ni Jacob because one of the sons of Judah na ang asawa si Tamar.
Correct,
Diba namatay
yeah.
yung asawa ni Tamar. Pero binigay si Onan. Ito namang si Onan, this is in Genesis. What he did, nag-withdrawal. Parang ginamit lang niya for sexual pleasure si Tamar. So hindi nagbuntis.
Yes.
Oo, hindi nagbuntis. So ginamit lang niya.
Bad
So
yun.
ngayon, pinatay ng Diyos si Onan.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Meron pang isa pang boy na anak si Judah na ayaw ding ibigay.
Na ayaw niya. Oh, ayaw.
Takot na siya eh. Sabi niya, baka mamatay din to.
At gumawa ng paraan si Tamar.
So she had to go through very, nag-major production siya.
Nagkaroon siya ng plan. It was an entrapment. She dressed herself like a prostitute.
Oo.
Tapos nabiso tuloy na si Judah pala kasi gumagamit ng prostitute. Hanggang sa nangyari na yon, Judah was not able to identify itong si Tamar. And nagbuntis. And then the revelation came na, ito yung tatay ng dinadala ko.
Yun, telenovela yun.
Telenovela.
Tapos sinabi niya na, she has more honor than me, sabi ni Judah.
Yes,
something like that.
yeah.
Because she was fighting for her right.
For her right, yeah.
Yeah, and not just for her right, but for what was right under the eyes of God.
Yeah. So yan yung magandang background ng levirate marriage.
Okay.
So back to Ruth.
Okay, so verses 14 to 18.
So then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law."
So Ruth stayed, but Orpah left.
Yeah.
Do you think Orpah was wrong?
I don't think Orpah was wrong in what she did.
Ginudge na yun, no? Cancelled na si Orpah kasi umuwi.
Hindi naman.
She's not loyal.
Practical lang naman si Orpah, di ba? Tama naman. Nakinig si nanay niya.
But if you think about what Ruth did, it was extreme, right?
Kakaiba si Ruth, no?
She's a Moabite. So she
Yeah.
uprooted her entire life to go to Israel.
And stay with a widow.
Exactly. To stay-
Yeah. And to think you're a widow. Identity mo, binura mo.
And imagine she also used, sabi dito sa verse 17, may the Lord punish me severely
Yeah.
if I allow anything but death to separate us. So naniniwala siya sa Lord ni Naomi, di ba?
Which is surprising.
Yeah.
Kasi sino ba yung closest na possible witnesses lang ni Yahweh kay Ruth?
The family.
Naomi and Elimelech,
Elimelech, yung husband niya.
yung sons.
Ang asawa.
Pero hindi naman sila, I think they're not perfect witnesses.
Yeah.
Precisely because of what they did, right?
Yeah, they left.
They left the land.
But I mean, who is a perfect witness?
That's the beauty of this story.
Yes, exactly. Kahit ganun, may testimony pa rin sila.
Yeah, hindi sila perfect agents ni Yahweh.
Yet nag-shine pa rin.
Something got through the cracks,
Kahit papano, no? Meron pa din. They still bore the name of Yahweh somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Ruth probably saw some fruit in Naomi's life, though it's not perfect.
That's right.
Yeah.
She probably saw, okay, there's something in this woman's life that I
Yeah.
would like to emulate.
She probably had a good husband.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that as Christians, we are called to be image bearers. When people look at us, do they go, oh, I want what she has? And I don't know if you guys have heard this quote before, but to unbelievers, the life of a Christian is their Bible.
Yeah.
Na they may not open the Bible, but they will read your life.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
that's right.
They'll look at you. They'll look at your Facebook posts.
So, I won't post that.
Yan na.
So
Guys.
somehow, ang ganda ng story ng redemption dito that despite the fact that the agents were imperfect, that they're flawed,
Yeah.
this is God's grace.
Yun, another instance of grace, right? How many times did we say that word today? A lot.
Oo, paulit-ulit tayo. But to emphasize, diba?
Yeah. In verse 14, it specifically says that Ruth clung to Naomi. And the word cling in Hebrew is actually the back. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's the back. And it's the same word used in Genesis and Deuteronomy. Rainier, if I could ask you to turn to Genesis 2:24.
This is the marriage text. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh.
In Rainier's reading, it was united, but it's the back in Hebrew. And then, Gutch, could you read Deuteronomy 10:20?
You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. And by his name you shall swear.
Yun, hold fast.
Cling, hold fast.
The back. So in those two verses, we see that the back is actually characteristic of God's covenant with his people.
Parang hindi kita iiwanan.
Correct. And it's Ruth, a pagan woman, is the one she's clinging to Naomi, right? She's using that exact same word is used here. And as Gotch mentioned earlier, it does also show that God's salvation is not only for the Israelites, but will eventually expand to all of us.
May mga breadcrumbs, no? Like little hints.
Meron.
Ruth expresses her covenantal commitment to Naomi.
Classic na line na to.
But Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us."
Your people will be my people and your God, my God. It's a complete abandonment of who you were, how you identified yourself. Kasi nung araw, you can never divorce your ethnicity from your religion.
Yes, during those times.
So if you choose to worship another God, then you are saying goodbye and leaving behind everything kung sino ka dati. Even your ethnicity, your national identity, your culture, because everything is just tied to your faith, your religion, your beliefs. So mabigat to.
Although that still happens now in countries where Christians are persecuted.
Yes, like my friend who came from a Hindu background, he's from Nepal. Mabigat yung consequence nung conversion niya when he told his father and his wife. Ay nako, grabe, away
Intense.
talaga.
Oo. So imagine during these times, diba? And to think, diba, since Ruth is a woman, parang you're already marginalized to begin with. You're a widow.
Tapos gusto mo pang maging follower ni Yahweh?
Exactly, oo.
Ang ganda kasi I just admire Ruth, how she responded to her grief. That she still found hope in God because ganun na yung situation and she's still willing to follow Yahweh.
Yeah,
Walang
no.
pangitain ng may bright future ba ako sa Bethlehem? Meron bang blessing ako dyan? No? Hindi ganun yung motivation, She did not want to go to Bethlehem because there's a promise of prosperity or anything like that.
She actually didn't know anything, right? She didn't know.
Yeah, first time niya doon. I'm guessing it's her first time out of Moab. She didn't know what to expect.
Wala.
But imagine for you to say, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. And she didn't know them. But she's just basing it, I guess, on her interactions with Naomi and the family. She's like, well, if everyone else is like you, I guess they're okay people. We're assuming, diba?
Yun, so they returned to Bethlehem. And then Mitch, if you could read the last few verses of chapter 1.
So 19 to 22.
So the two of them continued on their journey. When they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. "Is it really Naomi?" the women asked. "Don't call me Naomi," she responded. "Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer, and the Almighty has sent such tragedy upon me?" So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring at the beginning of the barley harvest.
So may rebranding na nangyari dito. Okay.
Yeah. She changes her name. And if you remember earlier, Naomi means pleasant and lovely, right? And then Mara means better, actually.
Oh.
So she's like, no, I'm a different person now. O iba.
And then she was pointing to God as the reason, cause.
I like how Naomi, even if she recognizes her bitter situation and changes her name to Mara, she does recognize also that God is still behind it all.
Yung sinabi niya, "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." Yung specific name na ginamit niya, yung Almighty.
El Shaddai.
Oh, El Shaddai na, the one in control, the one in power. So I don't think she's doubting the capability of God, but I think she is probably doubting the character, if he truly cares.
Oo.
His goodness.
If you had all the power in the world, why did you do this?
Pero tinatanggap naman niya.
Tinatanggap niya.
And I think it's also important to point out here that Naomi has quite a narrow view of what she's going through. And that's not specific to her. I definitely have a narrow view also of the things that happened to me. Like in the end of this chapter, we don't see light in this particular situation yet because Mara's still Mara.
Yung pa rin yung
Stuck in her bitterness.
Tsaka that's what grief does, diba? Grief really narrows your view. It really makes everything just, it's like a tunnel and then that's it. Yun na lang yung nakikita mo. Kasi yun na lang yung nararamdaman mo. So, but for me, I admire her pa rin in this part because she was honest to be able to say that this is how I feel. I feel God has, raised his hand against me. And it's tragic and I don't understand it. But he's still almighty.
Right.
I like how Gutch pointed out earlier that Naomi still refers to God as the Almighty, as El Shaddai. And I just wanted us to look at a few Old Testament verses where El Shaddai was used. So, Rainier, if you could head over to Genesis 17, 1-5.
When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I'm God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations.
So we see a transformation, right? God transformed Abram from Abram to Abraham.
That's right.
And this same Abraham is the guy who his wife was barren and yet a child was given.
He was 99 at that time.
Gutch, could you read Genesis 35, 9-12?
God appeared to Jacob again, and he came from Padan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, Your name is Jacob. No longer shall your name be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. So he called him Israel. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you. So yun, so I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, and then here we see God is changing Jacob's name from Jacob to Israel, right? So another instance of name changing. He changed Jacob's deceitful heart and blessed him instead.
Interesting.
And then Mitch, Genesis 49, 22-25.
Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb.
Okay, so in the verses that Mitch read for us, we see that Joseph, who was imprisoned for 13 years, God used him and actually made him an Egyptian leader later on. Which was very timely because when there was a famine in his people, like he was able to help them, right? He even helped his brothers. In the 3 passages we read, we see that God isn't just an all-powerful God. He more specifically has a power to transform and to use what we perceive as evil for his good.
Yun yung famous verse doon sa Genesis nga, di ba? Na what you had meant for evil, God meant.
God meant for good. That's right. And this God is the same God who's present here with Ruth and Naomi. And he's also the same God who knows and cares for us today, despite COVID and everything that's happening in the world around us.
Sa akin, it really did strike me itong rename na to.
Yeah, Naomi who changed her name to Mara.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if where I'm going with this, but ang interesting lang nung she changes her identity based on the tragedy that happened to her. This is who I am. This tragedy defines who I am.
Exactly.
In that line of thinking, there are many things kasi that define our stories. Especially ako, I love stories, and I think stories defined me.
Same.
I have several stories. I can say na these are the stories that define me. And some of these are really bad stories that have shaped me. And I guess in Danger, for the longest time, I was wearing these stories as my story. This is who I am. I have been defined by this tragedy that happened in buhay namin ng pamilya namin. Parang ganong klase. And I'm thinking lang na in Christ, there is a story above all these stories. I'm not just this. I'm not just this. Yes, totoo tong mga nangyari sa akin, but ultimately, they don't define who I am. The one who defines who I am is the God who I serve. And his name is Jesus Christ. And it is a name above all names. And this is who is living in me. Alam mo yun?
Yeah, and it's, hindi na siya my story. It's our story. Because suddenly you realize that God is there. It's just as much his story as it is yours. Like here in Ruth, we can see his hand. We just need to look more closely. And same thing with our lives, diba?
Yeah, so, so far we've seen that against the backdrop of the distressing judge's time, there are people who still have faith in God, who the back to Yahweh and trust in the Almighty's power to transform. And during this pandemic, it's a very good time to ask ourselves, are we trusting in God's providence, or are we still insisting our own way of doing things? Are we like Ruth, who has faith even if she doesn't see everything? Or are we like Naomi, who makes bitterness her identity?
Yeah, and to add to that, etong si Ruth tsaka si Naomi, they're small pieces in a big story
Yeah.
that God is telling.
That's right.
Itong mga pangyayari na, there's something bigger there.
Yeah, like it's not just about them.
Yeah, yung sinabi ni Mitch na it's not just my story, it's our story. God
Yeah.
has this plan, this big story that He's doing. And it's not just about these little characters and not just about them. It's about God telling the story. There's a massive story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Big story. Ano ba yung big story na to? And we'll find out what that is as we go through the chapters.
Yay.
Okay, so I guess doon nagtatapos ang Ruth chapter 1. Abangan ang susunod na kabanata sa Ruth chapter 2 sa ating next episode coming up in a few weeks. Thanks and bye-bye.
Bye!
Thanks for joining us in the UCM Interface Bible Study Podcast. If you want to know more about our ministry, check out the UCM Interface Facebook page or email us at ucminterface@gmail.com. Join us in Union Church of Manila, Rada, Corner Legazpi, Makati City. Our Sunday services are also on YouTube. Thanks and God bless.